Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 58 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Before we get the day show off and running, I need to apologize to Mr. John Eberhart for mispronouncing his name through the entire show. I didn't mispronounce, but I misspelled Lee Lakosky's name a few shows ago, and now I've done it to Mr. Eberhart. So with that, I apologize, John. I know we've talked already, but I thought I'd publicly confess my sins. So maybe there is some merit to the gentleman who said that Todd should fire me because I was a horrible host or whatever it was he said. Maybe there's some merit to that argument. Whatever the case, here is our show with none other than Mr. John Eberhart. Hope you enjoy. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Tonight I have with me via Skype on the other line Mr. John Eberhart. Now, John has been at this game for quite some time. I was actually doing a little bit of research on John, and I found a pretty cool quote from Joe Bell, who's the executive director of the Pope and Young Club. He said, "John is a dedicated, passionate deer expert that doesn't copycat. Instead, he's notorious for establishing his own way of hunting. John Eberhart is definitely that person. If anything, he's an extreme example of someone who has mastered the craft of tackling big bucks on heavily pressured hunting areas. He accomplishes what many say is impossible, and it is in this wisdom that I have learned so much about real whitetail hunting. There are few in my realm of knowledge that can hunt whitetails on par with John. He's packed with genuine experience and knowledge that will help improve anyone's deer hunting success." Again, that was a quote from Joe Bell, the executive director of the Pope and Young Club. John, how's it going tonight?
Good. That was a pricey testimonial, by the way.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, exactly. No, that was nice.
Oh, well, thank you. I think it's safe to say you're an avid deer hunter. You've been hunting, from all accounts that I can remember. It's got to be somewhere north of 40, 50 years, correct?
Well, a little over 50 years, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Pretty much self-taught?
Yes, nobody in my family hunted. Nobody in my family owned any property. Everything I've ever done has been on public or knock on doors for free permission, no bait, no food plots. No shacks. I hunt out of a harness, so I don't use tree stands. Totally 100% self-taught, yes.
Cool. So is it safe to assume then that you are a tree saddle guy?
I am a tree harness guy.
Tree
I don't
harness.
use a saddle,
okay,
but I use a harness, which is the same thing, where you're basically sitting in a harness system like an arborist that prunes trees and stuff. You know, I'm facing the tree, tethered to the tree with a lead strap.
Okay.
And it's just a little fabric seat under my butt, basically. And so you can move around the tree and shoot 360 degrees. You can hide behind the tree. You can hunt crooked trees. I can hunt a 2-inch diameter tree. I can hunt a flat wall if I wanted to. Tree diameters don't pose a problem. So there's no tree I can't hunt. And the advantages of a harness over any kind of conventional stand are huge.
Now, when you're in said harness, how is it that you're keeping your feet on the tree? Are you using, I've seen various different things. Lone Wolf used to make the Assassin. I know a lot of guys use those, or at least the guys that can find them, or gals that can find them at least. What is it that you use?
Depends on whether I'm on private property or not. If I'm on private property and the property owner allows it, I'll use screw-in steps. If I'm on public land, I use a strap-on steps, and at the top I'll have a ring of steps, maybe, depending on the diameter of the tree, it may be anywhere from 3 to 6 steps that I can slide around and put in position before I tighten it.
Now, are you able to get all the way around the tree?
Oh yeah, there's no dead spots when you're hunting out of a harness. It doesn't matter where an animal comes in from. You can shoot any direction. Yes.
So it's safe to say that you've got some experience with this, the way it sounds. I had Garrett Prowl from DIY Hunter, DIY Sportsman on, and he had just gotten into it this last year, and really said that he was enjoying it. And I don't know, you probably don't know a lot about me, and I wouldn't expect you to. But I had this last year given up, 20 plus years of hunting, relatively the same ground in central Wisconsin to go public, and I did it this last year and loved it, and it certainly piqued my interest after having hunted hill country in southwestern Wisconsin, and I actually lost 18 pounds over the course of this last fall.
Whoa! Wow.
But I was dragging, a lone wolf and sticks and camera gear and a backpack and all the stuff up and down those hills, and I got in good shape, but wearing a tree harness out there and throwing some steps in a bag and what have you sounds maybe a little bit easier.
It's much more mobile. Basically, my harness, because I've cut, they sell commercial harnesses. There's a company called New Tribe, and they sell a harness that's called a kestrel, like a hawk. And it's a really nice harness. It doesn't have a whole lot of stuff on it, but mine, I've cut all the BS off it because for safety reasons, there's certain things they have to put on it for liability insurance, and I take all that stuff off. Mine literally rolls up the size of a softball, like playing softball, fast pitch softball, and weighs about 1.5 pounds, and I can, I'll typically go into a season with 50 trees prepped, and I may only prep 6 or 7 new trees a year, but then I'll go back to my trees from previous years and, clear up shooting lanes or whatever. But I'll usually go into a season with 40 to 50 trees prepped, and I can hunt any one out of the harness that I carry in my backpack all the time. So once you own one harness, it'll last you for the rest. I've been using the same one since 1981.
Oh, my. Okay.
And I've probably hunted over 100 pieces of properties with that. And, if you want to just freelance, you can just carry a fanny pack with 15 tree steps in it, or strap-on steps if you're on public land, and your harness, and you're good to go.
Okay. I guess I've got to ask, I think you said 1981, right? Mm-hmm. And what made you way back then? I don't even know. No, I definitely couldn't hunt back then. What made you go to a saddle then? Just the mobility? Yeah, primarily. I've always been the type of guy that tries to improve at whatever I do, and I was in a sports shop once, and this is when they first came out, and at the time this thing was called a tree sling. The tree sling was the first one on the market, and it was made by a company called Anderson. It's called the Anderson tree sling. And it was made out of seatbelt fabric, basically, 2-inch wide strapping, and there were several of them stitched together, so it formed a seat. And then it came around to the front of you, and there's what's called a bridge strap that goes in front of you, and then there's a lead strap hooked to that bridge strap. So the lead strap wrapped around the tree and tied to itself. And it was very awkward at first, but I could see that I wouldn't ever have to buy another tree stand. I didn't have to worry about creaking stands. I didn't have to worry about carrying a cumbersome stand. I didn't have to worry about somebody hunting my stand when I wasn't there. I didn't have to worry about ice on the platform. I didn't have to worry about a deer picking me because I could slide around to the back side of the tree. If a deer came in I didn't want to shoot, or if a deer that did come in I did want to shoot, I'd just peek around the corner and shoot it when it got in position. I could just see the benefits of it. So as awkward as it was at the time and just different, I just worked at perfecting how to use it. And it took me probably a full season back then because nobody else used one. I don't know anybody else that used one at the time. But I could just see the advantages of it moving forward in my bow hunting career, and I learned how to use it, and I would never even consider hunting out of a tree stand. Interesting.
I think they're archaic.
So,
to put it bluntly.
let me. Let me ask you a question. If you had your own 400 acres, and I know that's based on what I've been able to accumulate in terms of knowledge about you over the last several years, that's probably not your thing. But let's just say, for conversation's sake, you had your own 400 acres. Would that change your mind?
No. The advantages of a harness over a tree stand are huge. You can't shoot 360 degrees on a tree stand. You have to hunt certain diameter trees with a tree stand. You can't move around the tree and use it as a blocker with a tree stand. So if you're hunting at a destination site, let's say you're at a primary scrape area, or if you're at an apple tree or at a white oak tree, where deer are going to come in and linger for a while, multiple deer, and you're sitting on the side of a tree during the rut phases when the foliage is down, and you're in a pressured area, you're going to get picked. If the deer there are not a deer you want to shoot, and they're going to be there for 10 or 15 minutes feeding or something, they're looking around. And you're going to get picked if you're sitting out on the side of the tree with no foliage, which typically during the rut phases, there's no foliage. Whereas with the harness, I can swing around to the back side of the tree. I'm totally oblivious to them. They can't see me. And then when if I wanted to shoot one, I'd wait for it to get in position, then I'd slide around and shoot it. Otherwise, if it was some does and fawns or a subordinate buck came in first, and then a bigger buck was going to come in later in the evening, I would be able to sit there for however long it took until they fed or whatever, and then moved on, and then I wouldn't spook anything. And then, later on, he'd feel more comfortable coming in. Makes sense.
Would you switching things up a little bit here, would you consider yourself 100% or the majority of what you've been able to garner in terms of knowledge about hunting whitetail deer self-taught?
Yes, 100%. Yep. I started postseason scouting back probably in the late 70s, and I really didn't know anybody else that did that at the time. So now, all of my scouting and location preparation is done during postseason, January through April, when I'm still looking at last fall's sign, and I can visit my properties, every day. I can stay there all day. Spooking deer is irrelevant, because I'm 6 months before season. So I can totally look at the property, prep trees, do whatever I want. Spooking deer is irrelevant. I can still visually see the scrapes from last fall, the runways, licking branches. I can identify rub from last fall from 2 years ago. And, you can pretty much just do whatever your heart's content. You go out there preseason. One thing I find in preseason that most people mess up is if you're hunting in a pressured area and there's a 3.5-year-old buck, he's really, really smart. He's smarter than a 5 or 6-year-old like out in Iowa or Kansas or Illinois or something like that. So if you're after a 3.5-year-old buck and you go in and you preseason scout, just your human intrusion alone is going to turn that buck nocturnal. Basically, the properties where they're at haven't been touched probably since turkey season. Somebody might have been in there turkey hunting a little bit in April or May, but all summer long nobody's in there. And all of a sudden here's this invasion of preseason activity, and those deer, they've been there, done that. They've lived a couple antlered season and survived through gun season and bow season.
Sure.
And as soon as there's that influx of human activity, they know what that means, and they turn nocturnal until the rut phase is when their testosterone levels rise and they start moving in the daylight.
So when you're hunting in Michigan, and I know that's where you live, so is primarily most of your hunting big woods? Is it ag country? Is it a mix?
I definitely gear towards, my preference is towards ag. I like to hunt probably 60 ag, 40 timber. That's my preference in Michigan, but probably my first 20 years was northern Michigan, so it was almost exclusively timber. But now I hunt more ag, a mix of ag and timber. And ag and timber is just a lot easier to hunt because once the ag is down, the deer are more confined. They're basically confined in smaller areas, whereas in big timber areas, deer tend to just browse and wander. It's hard to find destination spots in big timber areas. And typically in big timber, you don't see scrape areas either.
What in terms of when you say big timber, let's just define that for the sake of conversation here in just a minute. Are you talking like, let's say, 1,000 contiguous acres of timber?
I'm just talking timber where there's no ag whatsoever.
Okay, gotcha. Like, so we're talking the UP or northern Wisconsin and that kind of area.
Yeah. Northern
Okay, gotcha.
northern Michigan.
Yep.
Once you get above, well, for those that are in Michigan, once you get above US 10, it's pretty much all woods. I mean, it's not just all just mature timber. There's swamps and stuff like that.
Sure.
And stuff, but it's all wooded. There's no agriculture.
Okay. Backing up to one thing that you said that piqued my interest, and it's going to pique a lot of people's interest that are listening to this, postseason scouting. That's where we're at right now, and certainly this show will air during that time. What is it that John Eberhart's looking for when he's out that maybe the average guy that hasn't read 100 articles in whatever magazine you pick, what is it that you're doing that's maybe a little bit different than what most people would be doing?
Well, in fact, I just wrote an article. It's going to be printed in the August issue of Deer and Deer Hunting. It's called Destination Locations. And that's what I key on. When I go out and postseason scout, I'm looking for destination spots. I don't like hunting just runways or the side of a ridge or up on an oak flat, where there's, 100 oaks on a big hill and hopefully the deer is going to come underneath the one I'm at. I look for destination locations. I look for scrape areas with perimeter security cover and transition security cover to it from a bedding area. So scrape areas under the right circumstances. I look for mast or fruit trees. Like in Michigan, when you get into southern Michigan in the ag area, there's always old apple trees here and there. So that's something I really key on. If I can find an apple tree surrounded by perimeter security cover with transition security cover to a bedding area leading to it, to me that's a premium spot, especially for early season when the apples are dropping. And I look for white oaks. A lot of times you'll scout an area and there'll be a lot of oaks, but most of them are red oaks. Well, if you find one or two white oaks, the deer are going to eat the white oak. They're going to come and feed at the white oak acorns before they're going to eat the reds because there's less tannins in them. They're a lot, it's like eating a macadamia nut. So I look for destination areas or where a ridge might come down or into a pinch point going into a swamp, basically places where there's a lot of doe activity. A scrape area is always located where there's doe activity. Obviously, if you get a couple of white oak trees and everything else around it's red oaks or something like that, that's probably going to be a destination spot, and it's likely there might be a scrape or two there by season. Where pinch points are. You get a pinch point in transition cover from bedding to feeding, or a pinch point in between two bedding areas in a transition zone. That's going to be a place where there could be some potential scrapes. But basically, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for destination locations. But everything I do in Michigan, because Michigan is the most heavily pressured state in the country, we have 320,000 bow hunters. Everything I do revolves around security cover. So if I find a place, let's say I'm scouting public land.
Okay.
And I find this spot, let's say there's 3 apple trees. And there's 10 scrapes in the area. And I'm exaggerating here just to make a point. And let's say there's 30 rubs, okay? And it's early March. And these are all from last fall, all these scrapes and stuff. If I can walk to it easily from a parking lot, I don't care how much sign there is, I'm not going to hunt it. Basically what I try to do when I'm scouting public land or heavily pressured private, because a lot of times even the private parcels, you may have 20, 30 property owners that own 10s and 20s in a section, so that's pretty heavily pressured too. You might have 30 bow hunters in a 640 acre section. So whenever I'm hunting heavily pressured property, I try to pretend everybody's trying to kill me. Where are the only places that I might move during daylight hours? Because there's going to be so much hunting pressure here. basically that makes it where I have to cross a river with hip boots or waders or take a canoe across a lake or crawl on my hands and knees through brush to get back to an opening or, a different bedding area or something. And so that's another reason I use a harness. You can't do that kind of hunting toting a tree stand on your back. You just can't. I always got a big kick out of Michael Waddell walking down a 2-track with a climber on his back going hunting. He's never hunted any place that's pressured in his life because you don't do that in a pressured area. But anyway, that's what I do. I go back. I try to find places where other hunters are just not willing to make the effort to go, and that's obviously where the big bucks are pushed to. And that's the type of areas that I set up on. The more heavily the pressured the area is, the more isolated and remote the places that I look for. And a lot of times I'll scout a property and, if I get permission on a property or look at some new public land and there may not be anything there worth even hunting, and I'll just abandon it. I won't set anything up.
One question that I had in my head this afternoon, and as I was at my other job doing this job, I couldn't help but think about my situation last year. In that, I went to public land versus private. In the private that I had hunted, although it was a 200-acre farm with 30 acres of timber and 70 acres of marsh and a little bit more timber maybe scattered about, I can't help but think that or feel that even though that was private, it probably got as much pressure on that private land is any of the public land that I hunted. The biggest difference that I saw or found was that maybe the deer density was lower, but I don't think that there was any less pressure, and I don't think that there was any less quality of the deer that were there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would absolutely I would agree with that. The biggest buck I've ever shot in Michigan was a state record, and it came off public land. I've hunted lots of private parcels, where I got permission on 5 acres, 2 acres. One of the biggest bucks I ever shot was on a 2-acre parcel. I got permission on just in 2014. So, when you get down into like southern Michigan or southern Wisconsin, the closer you get to a high general population area, most of our Michigan's population is in the south half of the southern peninsula. So obviously, property prices are high. So, it's not uncommon for a 648-acre section to have, 10 to 20, 30 houses around that, on those 4 roads going around that section.
Right.
And if each property owner has 1 or 2 people hunting on it, that adds up real quick. And it's not uncommon at all for a section to have 30, 40 bow hunters in it on opening day of bow season. Obviously, they're not going to be there every day, but
Amen.
Yeah, that's as heavily pressured as a lot of public lands, without a doubt.
Yeah,
I've hunted public lands where once you get back into these remote areas where the biggest buck I shot, the one I mentioned off state land, I actually wore chest waders through about, I'd say, 3/8 of a mile of tall cattail marsh to access a little island. And that's where I shot it. So once you get back into those remote spots like that, nobody's ever been there before. So, it's very, very isolated, but it's a lot of work to get there. And, you got to leave, 3-4 hours before daylight to get there. But that's what it takes to do it. So that's what you do. And you got to sit there all day because you want to be there before a deer comes in the morning. And then you can't leave until after a deer would leave it after dark, so you're not spooking anything with your entry or your exit. And hopefully you can pick up something moving around during the daylight.
I'm going to try and articulate this question as best as I can. How is it that you have been able to... Obviously, you've done your own thing, but let's think about for just a second all the people that are going to be listening. They've seen what they've seen on TV, and certainly there's good information there. And a lot of what we do is predicated on those kinds of things. At what point, or was there something that flipped a switch for you? That made you realize that you had to treat the way that you were hunting different than what you were seeing on TV? And again, I'm not trying to take away anything from, anybody that's doing their thing on TV. That's great. And
you want me to be perfectly frank with you?
Well, yeah, I think you're kind of a frank guy. So yeah, go for it.
I'm a very frank guy, and I would never ever consider hunting in any similar manner to anybody on TV. Ever. Those guys all hunt micromanaged properties. They pass up 3.5-year-old deer. He's not big enough. I've watched Drury's see 160 inches, and they're just not big enough. That is just not realistic. And if I were a person that did not hunt, and I had to base whether I was going to be pro or anti-hunting on what I saw on TV and how easy they make it look, I would be probably leaning on the anti-hunting side. That's how adamant I am against what I see on TV. I've written 3 books on bow hunting. Bow hunting pressured whitetails has been the #1 selling bow hunting book ever printed. I'm very proud of that, and that came out in 2003. And that's why I wrote the books that I wrote. I wrote Bow Hunting Pressured Whitetails, Precision Bow Hunting, and then Bow Hunting Whitetails the Eberhart Way. And they're all available on Borders, Amazon, on my website. And basically that's why I wrote them, because the stuff on TV I just think is BS. If a person was hunting pressured property and they hunted the way the guys do on TV on field edges and stuff, they're not going to kill much.
Well, yeah, I think, right. 100% agree.
That's just the facts. I know some TV guys that hunt. I know one in particular. It's one of the top shows on TV, and he'd rather hunt his 40 acres and kill a 2.5-year-old 95-inch 8-point than kill a 150-incher where he hunts on TV. He said, he said it's a joke. He said that, you go to these pay-to-hunt ranches in lieu of free advertising, and, you kill a 150-60-inch buck in 3 days. It's just non-realistic to me.
No, I completely agree with you. There's a lot of things. Again, I think there's value somewhere in some of the messages, but a lot of it is just not applicable to the average guy. Right. The reality is that, most of those nationally known personalities don't hunt on limited access places, or I think you would call them micromanaged access places. We don't have access to things like that, so it definitely changes the game.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's get back to hunting, which is more fun.
And I hate to be that crude. I'm just a factual person. I just lay it out there the way it is.
You're kind of like dealing with Todd. I'm glad he's not here tonight.
Okay.
He's a real pain in the ass, I'll be honest with you.
Well, my wife tells me I'm a pain in the ass, too. So.
I mean, he's a product engineer, so everything has got to be just so. Oh, my goodness. Anyway, I'm anxious to hear more about what it is that you do differently. I know you've taken, what is it, $30 in the state of Michigan that are in the record book?
I've got 31 in Michigan in the record book, which is the most with the bow, I think, of anybody. And I've been on 22 out-of-state hunts, and I've taken 19 Pope and Young bucks on those 22 hunts. And that was all public land and knock on doors for free permission properties as well.
So you've never owned, leased, paid a dime?
Never. Ever. Never will.
Well, I
if
feel
somebody
bad
gave
already.
me 400 acres for free, I wouldn't take it, because I've kind of laid my foundation of never hunting or owning my own property and never leasing any property or paying a dime, and that's the way I'm going to stay for the rest of my life till I die.
Well, I'm going to sell out and take the 400 acres.
Okay.
We can agree to disagree on that.
And I'll tell you what, I love the challenge of moving around. I get permission. I lose permission all the time. I've hunted well over 100 pieces of free knock-on doors for permission properties and scouted them and hunted them. And I get them and lose them all the time. And I love the challenge of just going someplace, like going out of state and on a 1-week hunt and killing a P&Y buck. I just love the challenge. out of state, it's just a lot easier. You know, you go to Iowa, Kansas, Illinois. It's just it's just another game out there. Really, it's just a lot easier, even on public land and free permission properties.
Right. Let's
than
be
it is here at Michigan.
Yeah, let's be honest. There's not a host of people that are lining up to come to Michigan or Wisconsin to shoot their next booner. It just, I mean, I live, in the Wisconsin Dells area, and there's tons of great bucks around here. There's tons. There's great opportunities, but not like there is in some of these other places. And I'm actually going to get the privilege of going to Iowa this year. I hope I've got enough preference points, so I'm going to go down and hunt with Todd. And we actually talked about it today, and he's just going to turn me loose and let me do my own thing, and that's what I like to do.
How many points you got?
I've got 4.
Oh, yeah, that should be enough to go to any place.
I'm hoping so. So we're going to go down, and that's why I'm so interested in what you do in terms of scouting. Let me selfishly ask you, if I can.
Because I totally change gears when I go out of state, and I'll tell you if you want to know.
I do, but first I want to be selfish and tell you. Well, let's just say that I got access to a 200-acre square, so to speak, and half of it's timber. If you got permission to hunt on something like that today, how do you start that process? I think I know where you pick up in the fall based on everything that I've been able to read. But how do you start that process today of setting it up and getting it ready to hunt?
Well, this is going to come as a shock to you because of the 22 trips I've taken out of state and 19 P&Y bucks I've taken on those 22 trips, I've never went and pre-scouted any of them. So basically, I go there. Typically, they're 7-day hunts. Typically I already have permission someplace, or I have some public land I've chosen to hunt on, and the first day or full day and a half, I scout and prep several locations, and then I start hunting. So I don't go out prior to the hunt and scout and prep locations and then go back and hunt. I've never done that. It's always been the day or day and a half before I actually start hunting is when I scout and prep locations. But one thing that I do when I go out of state, I always try to look in areas where there's 80 to 90% ag. I want to have as little timber as possible because I bow hunt in Michigan until the 14th of November. Our gun season opens on the 15th, so that's when because I don't gun hunt, that's when I leave to go out of state. So I'm going during the full-blown rut typically, and I want all the crops are going to be down wherever I go. So if the area is 70, 80, 90% ag and 10% timber and brush or plum brush or pines or whatever, once the corn's down or the milo's down or whatever's down, the deer are very, very confined. I think that's one thing a lot of hunters do wrong when they go out of state or on a short-term hunt, is a lot of people want to go to a place where there's a lot of timber, a lot of woods and stuff like that, and it's very difficult to pinpoint destination areas on a short-term hunt. So obviously the more confined the deer are with the crops being down, the much easier it is to find destination locations and pinch points and stuff. That's a huge factor to being successful when you go out of state, is not gravitating to where there's so much timber, but where there's less timber and more ag, because when the corn's down, the deer are really confined.
Gotcha. So you're looking to basically minimize the amount of cover that they have, so you can cut down the amount of time essentially that you're having to scout in a way.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Well, that's.
Yep.
I guess I never thought of it that way, but that seems smart.
Yep. Like when you go to Kansas or even Iowa, you'll have these old floodplain draws where they're basically every mile and a half there'll just be this low-lying area where every time they get floods, that's where the water runs through the countryside. And, everything else above that is just flat and pretty much, agriculture. And once that ag's down, that low floodplain area, those draws, they may be, they may go from 50 yards wide to 100, 150, 200 yards wide, but they kind of just meander through the countryside, and you just find a pinch point in those draws. That's where they transition all day long. Once daylight comes up and they come up get out of the crop fields, they go down there, and that's where they chase does, and it's just makes hunting really, really simple.
Your latest book, Bow Hunting Whitetails the Eberhart Way, you go through one of the chapters, if memory serves me correctly, is how to hunt pressure or hunting pressure. When you're talking about situations like you just got done describing, how is it that you deal with pressure?
Well, when I go out of state, there never is any other pressure. If you go to Kansas, Iowa, and southern Illinois, there really is. I'm used to pressure, so out there's really not any. I could count the guys I've seen out there, other bow hunters on one hand probably in the last 5 years. So there really isn't any other pressure. And one thing I found out there, I walk on eggshells in Michigan, just like you do in Wisconsin. Every time I take a step, I think about the reaction to every step I make and every leaf I crunch. When I'm out there, I'm a huge scent control freak. I pay zero attention to wind. I'm a scent lock fanatic. But when I go out there, I can go in and I can prep a location. I can prep 3 or 4 locations and hunt them the next day. I would never do that here in Michigan during season. There is no way. My intrusions of cutting shooting lanes and stuff like that, the odds of a mature buck going through there the very next day would be pretty close to zero. Out there, it doesn't matter. It just seems like human intrusions out there are just not that big a deal. There's so many mature bucks, and the rut is so intense at the time I'm out there, and so there's so much competition for breeding rights. It just seems like they just move. They move at the same hours as all the rest of the deer do. It's just a lot easier because there's so many mature bucks and there's so many of them vying for breeding rights. There's just a lot more daytime movements.
When you're not out of state and you're in Michigan, what is it that you do to deal with the pressure?
I try to get back to those isolated areas. Every place I hunt has some sort of form of security cover around it. So let's say I was out preseason scouting, postseason scouting, like right now, and there was no snow on the ground. And let's say on the edge of this crop field, there's a scrape area. There's a little indentation maybe into the woods that's 10 or 15 yards, and there's some trees around that little opening, and there's some scrapes there. Because that is exposed to that crop field, I would not set that up if I knew that crop field was going to be in hay or beans. Now, if I knew that crop field was going to be in standing corn, I would probably set a location up at that scrape area because the standing corn is a buffer of security cover. So that scrape area is going to have security cover. But I would never set it up if I knew that crop was going to be in beans or in some sort of a short crop field, hay or, winter wheat or something after the wheat's cut, because a mature buck in a pressured area is not going to come up and be exposed in a scrape area or eat underneath an apple tree if it's exposed to a big open area. They just don't do that. So everything I do is security cover oriented. And then during the rut phases, something else I do that a lot of people don't is I hunt interiors of bedding areas. A lot of people save them as quote-unquote sanctuary areas. That's another thing I do. When I postseason scout, I scout out the interiors of all the bedding areas where I'm hunting, and I'll prep a location or two if it looks good inside the bedding area, and then I will only hunt those during the rut phases only, like from Halloween through the 14th of November. And they are very strategic all-day hunts. So I will be in my tree an hour and a half before daylight, settled in and quiet, and I won't leave my tree until a half hour after dark. So I'm in the tree before any bucks are going to move into the bedding area before daylight, and I don't get out of the tree until the deer are up and out of the bedding area at dark. So, and then basically, during the rut phases, most of the breeding and chasing actually happens within those secure bedding areas. So I've shot quite a few bucks in interiors of bedding areas during daylight. And usually that happens between 10 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Can you real quick
Typically is when you get to kill.
Define bedding area for me? I mean, what you would consider a bedding area? Have you gone in there, January, February, March, whatever, when there's no snow on the ground, and been able to basically pinpoint that this is a bedding area? Or are you doing that just based on cover? How is it that you're...
Just based on cover.
Okay.
I'm just basing it on it's the best security cover in the area or on the property that I have to hunt. Typically, if I pick up a piece of property from somebody and I scout it and there's no bedding area on it, let's say it's just open timber and crops, and the timber doesn't have any understudy, as security cover. A lot of times you'll have timber, and the canopy of the timber allows sunlight in, so there's going to be brush and stuff within the timber. But sometimes you get a timber where the canopy is so heavy, the ground is bare, there's no understudy, and a mature buck in a pressured area typically won't move through an open timber with no understudy during daylight hours. So I wouldn't even waste my time there. Everything I do gravitates around security cover or within a bedding area. So bedding area is just the best security cover on the particular property that I'm hunting. Or let's say the property next door has a nice bedding area, and then I have permission on this piece that's got some timber, but it's got some understudy. So a deer might feel comfortable coming out of their bedding area and crossing the fence into the timber I'm on that has some oaks in it, or maybe an isolated apple tree here or there, but it's got security cover. So a mature buck will feel comfortable transitioning out of the bedding area and coming into the timber to eat acorns or whatever, because there is security cover understudy as well. But if it were just open, leaves on the bottom and acorns, typically a mature buck in a state like Michigan wouldn't come in during daylight hours. So I don't know if and a bedding area could be a marsh, it could be, a swamp, it could be a tall weed field, it could be a old cutover, 10, 15-year-old cutover. It's just dense cover where a deer would feel secure. It would be a place like somebody's trying to kill you where you personally might feel secure in there laying down during daylight.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if you were going in preseason, January, February, March, April, whatever, and specifically looking for anything specific other than the physical makeup of the ground, basically. How much underbrush is there? What's the type?
No, but I'm glad you said that, because that's the cool thing about postseason scouting. 60+% of all bucks killed with a bow that are in the record book are shot during the rut phases, which is typically after Halloween. So that's the cool thing about postseason scouting. When you go out this time of year, you're looking at the trees. If you want to prep a tree, you're looking at the tree with no leaves on it. That's the same way that tree is going to look during the rut phases with no leaves in Wisconsin. Same with the understudy. If you go out preseason and you scout an area, everything looks dense during preseason because there's foliage on literally everything. So you may prep a location that looks like it's got a lot of security cover around it. You go back there, the 1st of November when all the foliage is down and it's wide open. Or you might have prepped a tree 20 feet high that had a lot of background cover with leaves and stuff when you prepped it. And now you get back there and you look at it and you're totally exposed because all the foliage is down. So that's the cool thing about post-rut hunting also, is you're looking at the tree and you're looking at the area exactly the way it's going to look like during the rut phases when these mature bucks actually start thinking with other body parts than their brain and making mistakes. So you may look at a tree and say, I need to be up that tree 25 feet instead of 18. I need to be up in that crotch, so I've got some background cover, or I've got some extra wood in the form of branches to give me some cover. Or you may say, well, you know what, this just doesn't have enough security cover in this area for a mature buck to move through during daytime, so I'm just not going to hunt here. So that postseason scouting, it gives you a lot of advantages. You can also block runways and alter them within shooting range. There's just a lot of different things you can do during postseason. The only thing I do during preseason, okay, let's say during postseason I go and I prep a tree at a white oak, or I prep a location at 2 apple trees out in the woods someplace, or I prep a tree at a primary scrape area, 40 yards off of a crop field, but it's down in some security cover. Well, what I have to do now, because an oak is an early season spot, an apple tree is an early season spot, so now what I've got to do is just prior to season, and I try to do this after September 20th, I'll go in full scent lock, headgear, everything, rubber boots, and I'll do what I call a speed tour. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at the apple trees or a pear trees or white oaks or the scrape areas, and I'm looking to see if they're actually bearing fruit or bearing mass, because obviously if I prep a tree in March, an apple tree or an oak tree, I have no clue if it's going to be bearing food in the fall. So I have to do a speed tour, and I like to do it after September 20th because most mature bucks are rubbed out by the 5th of September. So now they've had 15 days to lay rubs. So if the apple trees are dropping apples, if the oaks are dropping acorns, if the scrape area is active, there's going to be rub sign, if you know what I'm saying. You're going to see, at an apple tree, you're going to see other sign around it. Because if I pick one that has security cover around it, that means it's got brush and stuff, so there's going to be some rubs on it. Because if there's doe activity there, that means there's going to be buck activity there, and there's going to be rubs. So I'm not only looking for food, I'm going there after September 20th to also verify if there's any buck activity for early season hunting.
Now, you say buck activity. Are you there looking for buck activity, or are you there looking for a specific buck's activity? And maybe you don't know what that buck is, but is there? I guess what I'm asking is there a specific kind of rub that you're looking for? And by that I mean, are we talking about something that's waist high and thigh thick, or what is it that defines?
The diameter is not as important as the height, and you hit that right on the head. What you said first, I'm not looking for those rubs that are 2 feet off the ground to 3 feet off the ground. I'm looking for those rubs that are 3 feet off the ground to 4 foot off the ground. I'm looking for the rubs that are higher up on the tree, because as deer age, they get taller, and also their antlers get taller, so the rubs are up higher on the tree. And also scrapes. In September, if I go in there in September and there's scrapes at an apple tree or something, that means that buck, that's done by a buck that's at least 2.5 years old. He's got one breeding season behind him. Subordinate bucks that are 1.5 years old don't do scrapes in September. So if I see scrapes, I know it's at least a 2-year-old. And then if there is any rubs, I can verify a little bit of how old he is by how high the rubs are up on the trees.
So you're saying that typically a 1.5 year old buck isn't going to scrape in September.
Right. When scrapes first get opened up, I've seen scrapes opened up as early as August 20th.
Yep.
In a little apple orchard.
Sure. And
when you see scrapes open up that early, that is not opened up by a 6-point. That's a 1.5 year old. No, those are always done by deer that have a breeding season behind them.
Gotcha.
Now, once October gets there, and the small bucks will start hitting those scrapes and may scrape it a little bit. But if there's scrapes opened up in September, you can be guaranteed that's a 2.5 year old or older buck that opened it up.
Is there some sort of research that's been done to verify that, or are you basing that on your personal experience?
Just personal experience.
Gotcha. Okay. How much do you rely on trail cameras?
I don't use trail cameras. Trail cameras require a visit to a location, and every visit to a location is detrimental to that location's success if you're hunting in a pressured area.
Okay.
So I don't know what deer are in the area. I have absolutely no clue. I work everything by the sign that I see. I go by the scrapes and the height of the rubs. That's pretty much what I go by. And also keep in mind, because I am hunting in pressured areas, there's always other hunters in the area, and everybody else has cameras. But everybody else hunts more peripheral locations. They're hunting field edges or just in the open timber or something. And I try, if at all possible, to meet some of the other guys and find out what's on the property, and they're always happy to tell you. Everybody's happy to show you their pictures. I like seeing pictures of my hands wrapped around a set of antlers, but I also like looking at other people's pictures of what bucks are in the area that I'm hunting, but I don't use cameras myself. I do out of state. When I go out of state, I put a camera at every single location I prep, because human intrusions out there, I can go check them every day, and it doesn't seem to affect movements whatsoever. But in Michigan, I don't use cameras.
I definitely noticed this year using cell cameras that I got a little bit cockier, if you will, as to where I put them, and it definitely. I could go in there and say August and put something where I knew it was going to be working to my advantage in October. And I think there's definitely something to be said for, without a doubt, for the lack of intrusion. So
I would use a cell camera. So you said something that I totally 100% agree with. If I have so many spots set up, like I said, I'll go into the season with 40, 50 spots. And, cell cameras, you got to pay for the service for each one. So I'm just not willing to do that. But if I had a cell camera at a location where I never had to go there unless I'm hunting, yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that. As long as it was up high enough where it wasn't a visual intrusion.
Right. That was going to be my next question. Actually, I have two questions. Let's get back to the visual intrusion in just a second. Would you change whether or not you used a trail camera based on the type of land that you're hunting and how much intrusion there already is there? If you know that you're at Farm A and Joe is out there all the time because he loves to, he doesn't hunt, but he loves to mess around with picking berries and trimming his apple trees and taking care of the walnut trees and all that stuff. Would that change your mind at all?
No, because that's always the case. Every place I hunt, there's other hunters. I don't have any place where I hunt by myself. But my locations are not where their locations are. I'm back in the junk. They're out on the peripherals. This one piece of property where I'm doing my whitetail workshops, I do these 2-day whitetail workshops where one day is in the field and the second day is an all-day seminar at the largest sporting goods store in Michigan, Jay's Sporting Goods. And at that place, I've hunted that for 10 years. I've killed 6 book bucks off it. There's been 2 other guys that have hunted it for over 20 years each, and neither one of them have killed, a book buck off it. So we just hunt different locations. And
do they not know your name or what?
Oh yeah, they know who I am. Sure they do. yeah, they do. But I hunt out of a harness. Being able to hunt out of that harness makes all the difference in the world. I can hunt places they can't hunt, and I go back in the junk where they just, I've got to use waders to cross a couple of rivers, and they're just not willing to do that. so I've been fortunate enough to kill the bigger bucks, but. So by other people being there, there's always other people on the property. I never, ever in my life have hunted any place by myself. So there's always other people there, and that would still have nothing to do with putting a camera where I'm hunting, at my hunting location. Would I put a camera someplace that was, on the edge of a crop field someplace just to maybe get a monitor what's coming out into the crop field, and it's not at a hunting location and it has nothing to do with my hunting location back in the timber and the bedding area? Yeah, I'd do that. I wouldn't be afraid to do that. I don't do it, but it wouldn't bother me because it's not affecting my hunting spot.
Sure. So it's safe to say, or fair to say then, that you're only using a trail camera when you're feeling like you're not hunting as pressured a deer as you are in your home state.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I go out of state, typically what I'm hunting out of state is almost 100% primary scrape areas, because I'm hunting places where there's not a lot of timber. and a lot of ag, and in those types of areas, there's lots and lots of scrape activity. So every time I set something up, I put a camera on the scrapes, and then I'd go check the cameras every day, and I hunt the locations by what I see on the cameras. And my intrusions at the locations don't seem to bother anything.
Okay.
That sounds weird, but it's just the fact.
How do you prefer to enter and exit a property? No matter where it is, I would think that's pretty uniform. I would think at a macro or micro level, for that matter, intrusion.
Let me give you an example. 2 years ago, a guy invited me down to Ohio. They had two guys, actually. They had bow hunted it the early season, and they both gun hunted it. One guy missed a big buck twice. There was a big 10-point, and there was an 8-point with a drop tine, making it a 9-point. And they invited me to come down after gun season. I'd never met either one of these guys before. They just talking online on a talk forum. So I went down after gun season, and neither one of them could hunt. It was during the week. And when I scouted the property, there was no snow on the ground. But I could tell it was cold. I could just tell this property was not laid out for morning hunting because it was down in a valley, and there was a weed field that hadn't been planted, but it was just an old weed field. But that's still where the deer were coming down into feed in the evening. So I was going to hunt 5 days. I went in there the first day I was going to prep, so that was day 6, and then I was going to hunt for 5 days. I immediately eliminated all morning hunts. So now I'm down to 5 hunts. So instead of having 5 morning and 5 evenings, I've got 5 evenings because there's no way I could have hunted any place on that property without spooking deer with my entry. So on the edge of this field, there was this stand of pines. There was like 5 rows of pines along the one edge of this field, and then just the other side of the pines coming off the field, it dropped down into this brushy bedding area. So, and this is where the guy said he'd been seeing this 10-point come up. So I went in and I looked, and I found this really nice runway, and there was 2 scrapes down the edge, and I prepped this pine tree. And I went in. What I did different from him is when he was entering to hunt the pines, because he had one of those pines prepped too. But these were white pines, so they were bare underneath. You know how white pines, when they get so high, all the bottom branches, all the needles fall off, and they're just wide open. Well, he was walking along the edge of the pines, on the edge of the weeds and the pines. Well, because they're only 5 rows deep, the deer over the back side of that hill could visually see him. And you got to keep in mind, this is during the rut. He was hunting it during the rut, so all the foliage was down, and they could visually see him or hear him. So he was actually spooking the deer beyond the pines with his entry. So what I did is I walked down the edge of the field out towards the middle, then I walked out into the middle of the field, and then I walked directly to the tree from the middle of the field. So I wasn't walking down the edge of the pines. And then the first night I hunted that, it started snowing. And I had a 2.5-year-old 6-point come out, big 6-point, and he kind of worked those scrapes and meandered out into the field, and there were some other does and stuff, and another small buck. Well, when I exited, I waited till a half hour after dark, and then I exited over the hill because I knew now all the deer had came out of that brush into the field and then moved on, okay? So I entered through the middle of the field, so nothing could see me or hear me, down over the backside of the pines. But I exited through the pines after the deer had left the pines and went out into the field. Are you kind of with me? Okay, and then now day 2, now we had like 6 inches of snow. I did the same thing, same tree, walked way out around, walked through the middle of the field, just walked directly to my tree, got up the tree, and that big 10-point came out, and he worked those scrapes. He was opening up those scrapes because they were covered with snow, and I shot him at 14 yards. But the difference was my entry and exit was different than his. He was entering along the field, so the deer were spooking over the hill from the pines, and then he was exiting along the field, so the deer that had the does and fawns that had come up into the field were spooking in the field from his exit. So typically, most of my spots, my entry and exits are different. Obviously, if you're a lot of times, I'll walk out into the middle of a field and then walk directly to the timber and down into the timber to where my spot is. I'll never walk along the edge of the field because deer on the timber side with an evening entry can see me and possibly spook.
Can you say that exit, once again? Can you just repeat that?
Okay, if let's say there's a big field, a crop field.
Yep.
And it's butting up to some timber that drops down into, let's say, a swamp or something.
Okay.
Okay, my evening entry is going to be through the field. I'll come out into the field a couple hundred yards and walk up right through the field.
Yep.
And then I'll make a beeline directly to where I'm going to enter down directly into the swamp or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for my evening entry. And then with my evening after dark exit, I'll exit through the swamp, but I'll give it at least a half an hour after dark before I exit so that I'm not spooking deer transitioning from the swamp to the field.
Gotcha.
And then vice versa. If it's going to be a morning hunt, I'll come in through the back side of the swamp to my tree because the deer are out in the crop fields, and then I'll exit from my tree out back through the crop field because the deer are not in the crop fields then.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Got it.
Because every time you spook a deer, it makes the kill more difficult.
Well, here's what I've learned so far. Why I haven't killed 30 bucks that are in the record books.
I've got 50 in the record book total. So I guess that's the easy way to put it.
Oh, my goodness. Sometimes it's tough because you're constrained by your circumstances. Now you're the kind of guy who obviously has the stones to just go out and do it. And I never had until this last year. And I got challenged by somebody on a podcast, and I thought, well, all right, game on. I'll do it. Little did I know that I was committing to this in May. So I had I'll just be honest about it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I just started to, I took advantage of the fact that I was doing this podcast and just started, of course, what May was, we did a 4-part series on hunting public ground is what we did. But, it's just a different ball game when you're not constrained, like you are, some people just have that 40 acres that they go to again and again and again and again and again. And I think that this notion that you're going to kill a 150 plus inch deer consistently is just, it's just an unattainable dream, period.
It's not going to happen, no. And the downside of hunting, that's another reason I like doing what I do and not being constrained to a piece of property. People that are constrained to a piece of property overhunt it. If you want to hunt, if I had a piece of property and I were going to hunt a 40-acre piece of property, I'd probably hunt the first 2 or 3 days of season, and then I doubt I would even step foot on the property again until almost the 1st of November. Because what a lot of people don't understand, if you're hunting anything close to a pressured piece of ground, if you're in there hunting it in October, most of the mature bucks, they're nocturnal at that time of year. They're just not moving during daylight hours that much. So what you're doing is you're altering doe traffic at your locations. And when you alter doe traffic at your locations during what I term the October lull, when there's not a lot of mature buck activity, but there's still a lot of doe activity, every time you alter a doe from your hunting location, you're lessening your odds of killing a buck during the rut, because all buck traffic during the rut phases revolves around doe traffic. So the more you alter your doe traffic at your location prior to the rut, the less odds you're going to kill a buck at that location during the rut. And also, if it doesn't have security cover, your odds of a daytime visit by a mature buck are pretty close to zero.
So I know I've taken about an hour of your time, and I could probably take another 3, and maybe we can get you back on the show at some point. This has been a ton of fun. I'm just going to hit on a couple points, and you can either agree with me or disagree with me. I think I've understood what you've told me, and I just got to look back at all the notes that I've taken here. Fair to say you're not going to be hunting geographically in an area unless it has the right kind of security cover, like we talked about, the understored things of that nature. And with that security cover, you'd like to find adjacent to that, whether it's between that bedding area and the food scrapes, and that kind of sign, correct?
Yeah, I like to call them destination locations.
Okay, and a destination location in your world, I guess, would be defined as a scrape area, areas with mast, right? Pinch points,
fruit, pinch type. Yep, you got it.
Okay. Yep. So I was listening. All right, good. Some of my high school teachers that might be listening won't agree with me, but
one thing I will say, I gotta interrupt you for 1 second.
No, go ahead.
Security cover thing. When I do go out to like Iowa and Kansas and Southern Illinois on public land, the security cover is not as big of an issue. Those deer out there will walk out in a winter wheat field with 2 inches tall winter wheat and walk across it. I've seen them do it. So my security cover requirements when I go out west are not the same as what they are in Michigan. But anyway, I just thought I had to throw that in a little bit.
Well, no, I think that's important because let's be honest. I don't know, what your situation is come hunting season, but not all of us, and maybe including you or excluding you, however it is, can, allocate as much time to hunting as what some folks are able to. So when you're making decisions, you got to make the right ones, and the more educated you can be in making those decisions, obviously the better off you are.
And it's almost like the longer you hunt and the more you learn about it and the more you learn how to hunt correctly, the less time you spend in the woods. In fact, that's in that article that I wrote about destination areas. You hunt. I spend much, much, much less time on stand now than I did 30 years ago, and my time on stand is much, much more productive. I just hunt a lot smarter.
I don't think that I can tell you, in all sincerity, that I learned a ton about how to hunt deer this year. I definitely learned more than I've ever learned before, but I think I learned more about taking my time, being calculated in what it is that I would do, because there was that element of, another hunter or just knowing that there's more pressure there than maybe what I'm used to, whatever the case, being prepared, all those things. And I think, hopefully that evolves over time, the more that I learn. But when you're hunting those tough to hunt areas like you basically committed to, it sounds like, you've got to be not thinking about your setup and things of that nature. You're more concerned because you've done it so many times, if I'm understanding you correctly, with not leaving, not screaming, "Hey, I'm here." You want to leave it as unmolested as possible.
Yeah.
And the only way that you can really do that is by being prepared, right?
Yeah. It's very rare that I would ever hunt one tree more than 3 times a season. Very, very rare. And one thing you want to keep it around, I'm just saying this to you personally, if you're going to be hunting public land, that what I said about pretend everybody's trying to kill you, that may be a little bit over the top, but keep that thought process in mind, because deer that are 3.5-year-old bucks that are 3.5 years old and older on public land and in Wisconsin on a lot of private lands, they played this game before, and they don't do things that are stupid. Yeah, it's true. If they're with a hot doe, they'll come in your front door if the doe comes in first. But typically, they don't make stupid mistakes. They're going to stay where there's security cover. The hunters in the area push them back to where there's security cover, where if they do move, it's got to have a good secure area to move during daylight hours. So don't be fooled by the amount of sign. If it's a sign that a lot of other hunters have easy access to, and that sign's made by a mature buck, it was probably made during the security of darkness. So just don't go by the sign. If it doesn't have security cover, or, if it's not remote, don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think we all get, especially, depending upon the time of year, we all get lulled to sleep thinking we can get away with something that more often than not isn't going to happen. In a good example is what you said. They're just not going to make a lot of those mistakes that you're hoping that they're going to make, unless that doe drags them by you. And then don't forget, you got to beat that doe first. You got to get her by you. And we know that that's not very easy either.
And it's so easy to get lulled into that mindset.
So you've written 4 books.
Nope, 3 books.
Three books.
Pressured Whitetails, precision bow hunting, and bow hunting whitetails Eberhart way. They're all about hunting pressured animals. They all have state-to-state statistics as far as P&Y entries per licensed hunters for every state. They all have hunting pressure statistics. Basically, I took the land mass for every state, divided licensed hunters into land mass to give you what the hunter density is per square mile. So there's a lot of stats in there, but they're not like any other book. It's about hunting, it's blue-collar hunting, and it's not for the faint of heart. If somebody thinks they're just going to read one of my books and then go walk out and hunt on a field edge and kill a big buck, that's probably not going to happen. It's for somebody that's willing to put the work forth to go out and kill big bucks. And I also do these workshops and up in Michigan, central Michigan, and anybody interested, the information's on my website at deer-john.net, deerjohn.net. Or if you Google my name, they'd pop up.
Yeah. You've got an extensive website with information, and I'll put that definitely in the show notes. You've also got bow hunting pressured whitetails. I've got all 3 of those DVDs, I think. Mm-hmm. There's volume 1, 2, and 3. I thought I had something also...
Archery mechanics.
Yeah. Okay, archery mechanics. Okay.
And that's just more on the basics of learning how to properly shoot bows and shoot from trees and stuff like that. And I'm starting something new, too. Deer and Deer Hunting magazine they got with me. And starting in May, they do these YouTube videos. They're 3 to 5 minute topic videos. Mm-hmm. And we filmed 40 of them, and they're going to be on hunting public land and heavily pressured properties. So they start in May, and they'll run through November.
Great.
And that'll be on Deer and Deer Hunting's website.
Okay. Anything else that we need to know before I let you go, at least this time?
Nothing I can think of other than this was fun. I enjoyed it.
Good. I will, again, I'll have all the ways to get a hold of you. You've been nothing but accessible to me, and I appreciate that. Next time, you and Todd can probably argue over tactics and things of that nature, and that'll be fun to referee. I'm glad he wasn't here, so I could use you to my advantage. I appreciate you taking the time out and talking. Well, hey, this has been fun. Again, I'll have all the ways that people can get a hold of you on the show notes. Just real quick, when is your next whitetail workshop?
I'm doing seminars at the Ohio Expo in Columbus in March 16 through 18, and I'm doing seminars at the Novi Outdoorama March 1 through 4. And my first whitetail workshop is April 14th and 15th.
And that's in central Michigan.
Correct. Yep, and that's all the information's on my website.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with Mr. John Eberhart. What a wealth of knowledge when it comes to whitetail deer hunting. John definitely has his own style, and I think you could tell that from listening to him. His results speak for themselves. As he said, all the information that we talked about with respect to his books, his videos, and his workshops is on his website. If you look in the show notes, you'll find links to all of those things. As with a lot of the guests that we have, this is the first time that they've been on our show, so it's sort of a get to know you. And as we get to know them, we'll sort of drill down on some of their tactics and have shows on, maybe just segments of their hunting. One of the things that comes to mind is, scouting, hanging, and hunting, things like that. How do they go about identifying those spots? How they go about, prepping those spots without allowing the deer, or at least minimally allowing the deer to know that they were there. So look for some of that in the future. We'll get a lot of these folks on that we've interviewed for the first time. We'll get them back on as we get closer to the hunting season. I would say it'll be definitely green out. There'll be green leaves on the tree, and we'll get down to some real technique. Coming up, we'll have a few shed shows, a few turkey shows, a few this, a few that. If you have any suggestions for a show, and by the way, thanks for all your suggestions. It's definitely helped me. I've gotten lots of text messages, lots of emails, and those things sort of help us shape the direction of this podcast. With as successful as we've been, we've been very well received by any guest that we've asked to come on the show. So obviously that in turn makes it much easier to get them back on the show, or anyone else that you want to talk to. We can't promise that we can get anyone, but we'll definitely try. With that, I will close out the show for today, but I have to sound redundant here and repeat myself. We need your reviews on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, any of the places that you might listen to our podcast. For those of you who don't know what podcasts are, or who are new to this podcast, and you want to know how to use it, for iPhone, iPad, iPod listeners, grab your iDevice and go to the iTunes store and search for White Knuckle Podcast. This will help you to download the free podcast app that's produced by Apple. You can subscribe to the show from within that app, and every time I produce a new episode, you'll get it downloaded right to your device. For Android listeners, download the Stitcher Radio app. That is also free. Again, put in White Knuckle Podcast in the search, and you can subscribe to the show from within that app, and every time I download a show, it will get pushed right to your device. Just a couple of notes with respect to our web show. Again, we're airing it on YouTube on Thursdays and Facebook on Mondays. It'll air on YouTube first. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, head over there and do so as soon as possible. There'll be a bunch of bonus content there with Facebook's new rules and regulations. Facebook puts a whole lot less limitations on us, so we've decided to move some of our stuff over there. But the main web show will always be available on Facebook. It'll just be airing 4 or 5 days after the initial airing on YouTube. So with that, I'll close out the day. Again, if you have any ideas or suggestions, shoot us a message on our any of our social media forums, or send me an email, jason@whiteknuckleproductions.com. That's all I've got for today. Jason out.